Hello, thank you for joining us for this conversation of afkARI. I am Choucair. I'm a senior research fellow at the Environmental Politics program at the Arab Reform Initiative, or ARI. And I'm really happy to be chatting today with Kanj Hamade, who is a development and agricultural economist and an expert in food sovereignty and rural development. Kanj is now he's a consultant, and he's based between Beirut and Athens. But he's really become our food guru at ARI. He's our go-to on all things Lebanon and agriculture. So I'm so happy to be with him today. We most recently published a Q&A with Kenj on how the multiple wars that Israel has launched on the region are affecting Lebanon's food system. That Q&A is available on ARI's website. I really encourage you to read it if you haven't. It's called War, Ecocide, and Food Systems in Lebanon. But since the situation continues to deteriorate, since the so-called ceasefire is anything but a ceasefire, just over this weekend, in only 24 hours, Israeli airstrikes killed 51 people and injured 107 people in southern Lebanon. Journalists continue to be targeted, first responders, entire families killed by Israeli aggression. And at the same time, Lebanon is completely invisibilized, almost completely invisibilized in international news. So we wanted to keep this conversation going, to keep talking about the many facets of this war, including the war on food sovereignty. So, Kenj, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Let me start.
Yeah.
Let's start with the consequences of Israel's aggression on Lebanon's food system. So, very broadly, first, who is the most affected right now? And second, what are the effects on the country as a whole?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and also open the opportunity to discuss issues of South Lebanon and also issues of farmers, which are also sometime put aside. I would say, of course, the most impacted people are resident of bordering villages, and thus also farmers of bordering villages, who have lost almost everything. They have lost their homes, they have lost their towns, and also access to agricultural resources, access to land and access to forest and grazeland. And the particularity of farmers in bordering villages, and we're talking villages south of the Litani and around the Litani River, is that they have preserved, because of historical reason of occupation, but also because of resource issues. It's a region rich in forest and rangeland, but also poor in water. They have preserved a very low input, sustainable forms of production. They rely mostly on mixed agriculture, and by mixed agriculture, we mean animal husbandry and farming. And within farming, we mean vegetables, tobacco, wheat, cereals, but also mixed orchards. And those orchards that are olive based are also highly well connected to the forest around them. So it's a mixed orchard of olives and pine nuts, olives and carobs trees, also a lot of beehives. So and laurel production, laurel oil in certain areas. So it's a system that is very well connected, and it's rare in Lebanon. It's also rare in a lot of places, but especially in Lebanon. And maybe it's the only area where the system stay well connected to the land and its resources, to its forest and rangeland, and a mix of very traditional, low input, but somehow sustainable forms of production. So those farmers are the ones that have lost mostly everything for the moment, for now, and are the most impacted. The second most impacted farmers and population are coastal area of South Lebanon, around the plain of between Saida and Sur and Tir, who are more intensive farmers, mostly subtropical crops. By that we mean citrus, avocado, and banana, who are highly export dependent. And their impact, as also greenhouse on the vegetables, the impact on those farmers is really depend on access issues. Some of them still have access to the land, some of them have access from time to time to the land, and also because they are mostly plantation, subtropical plantation, citrus or avocado or banana, they require maybe less intensive day-to-day follow-up. So if the situation gets a bit better soon, or at least access is allowed, those will be less impacted. It still impacted, but to a lesser degree. In terms of the country as a whole, I think the main issue is economic slowdown. I mean, we have a general economic slowdown that mostly will impact families, vulnerable families, and also displaced people who do not have access to their everyday livelihood or work or businesses. And the risk in terms of is to increase poverty, increase vulnerability, and increase food insecurity, not necessarily from an availability issue or a supply of food issue, but rather from an affordability issue. The issue of price of food might be not the fact that you have less income and so food become less affordable is a second impact. I wouldn't say that in the short term there is an issue of supply of food overall in the country, but the main issue remains the prices and transformation that might happen on the longer and medium term.
Yeah, thank you, Kanj. Yeah, in terms of the limited effects, that it's geographically concentrated effects, I just wanted to give a statistic that I was just reading this morning. The Lebanese Ministry of Agriculture released the latest kind of data, and they said almost 80% of farmers in the south remain displaced from their lands, and that Israel has damaged almost a quarter of Lebanon's total agricultural land. So, just wanted to give a sense of the scale. And our partners, colleagues at Public Works Studio had described this destruction as agricultural extermination, ecocide. So, and their mapping, I just wanted to plug some of their work because their mapping on exactly where the attacks are happening has been really helpful. We collaborated with them to produce a report on ecocide where they talked about the agricultural damage. So thank you for that opening. Let's maybe zoom out a little bit also to talk about the larger, broader regional war. We're hearing a lot about fertilizers. I feel like everyone's having to learn about fertilizers and, how much the supply is affected by the current war, specifically by the closure or partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So can you tell us a little bit about that? What are the exact implications of this global shortage on Lebanon specifically?
Yeah, well, yeah. Let's go into jump into that, but before that, definitely the idea of ecocide, and this is why I wanted to strengthen the fact that these farmers in South Lebanon are not only dependent on the direct agricultural field, but also on the resources around it. So we're talking about forests and rangeland that have been systematically targeted by the Israeli occupation through uprooting, but also through white phosphorus. And the ongoing ecocide and ethnic cleansing is intentional and publicly stated. They're not ashamed of it between brackets, so publicly state that. The overall impact on the country and on farming is mostly is highly dependent on what's going on in Hormuz and the closure of the strait, who has an impact on energy prices and on fertilizer prices, because it's places where many of import of fertilizers and prime and raw material to make fertilizers happen, but also petrochemical, because pesticide, herbicide are also petrochemicals based production, and plastic that are used in irrigation system or in greenhouses is also a petrochemical subproduct, byproduct. So this is the third shock that is related to energy prices and input prices that Lebanese farmers have to face, and they have faced that in 2019 with the increase in prices in lira, and they have faced that in 2022 after the war in Ukraine and post-COVID inflation, and they are facing it now. So we're talking about a period of 5-6 years in which 3 years in a row there is a shock and a sustained shock, like the Ukraine shock was sustained over several seasons, in which prices of inputs increase dramatically. What does it mean in practical term when you are a farmer? If you take the example of field farmers who produce vegetables and cereals winter and summer season, we the production, most of those farmers rent land and rely on the fact that they need to have a good return on this rented land, and they use an intensified system of production in which they use a lot of input uh, 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 to be able to get a certain margin, because based on the idea that they need to supply and produce a lot to compensate for low prices that are controlled by traders. So they need a large amount of production, and input suppliers have supported this model in which they ask the farmer to produce a lot through using a lot of input. So when the system is shocked in the price of input, farmers cannot afford this input and have to rely on lower quality input, which means necessarily in this intensified system necessarily means ultimately means less yield and so less profit. And with the dollarization of the economy, also rent access to land has been increased, so prices have been increased. So the farmer that usually lives from renting land to produce is not able to sustain this type of production, and and is opting for a coping strategy that relies on reducing the area that he plants and then reducing his income and ultimately getting out of agriculture. When he gets out of agriculture, who comes and takes his place? And also, this is, even though it's a medium and long term process, but more corporate farming, more a large landlord who has the capacity to get some kind of economy of scale, and who will also be likely to also jump into a system of land lease on a longer term and a larger space. So this is putting a lot of farmers out of agriculture because of a system that is not necessarily able to withstand consecutive shocks and is highly dependent on inputs from on imported input and on prices of energy.
Yeah, so speaking about that, the system and what it's able to absorb or not absorb. So, what does this latest shock reveal about Lebanon's food system? If we had to think about, if we had to think about, is Lebanon's system just particularly fragile because of specific political economic structure that it has? It makes it extremely fragile to these, shocks to input prices, let's say. Or is it that the magnitudes and shocks are so large in Lebanon, like not just the fertilizer, that effect, that's global, but Israelis' aggression is very particular. It's a large magnitude effect. So any, system would really have a hard time with this kind of shock. Like, how do we think of what's
I
happening?
think both are true. Both are true. This is the problem with the shock. The difference between the Lebanese system and other system is that the shock in other system is absorbed and then it continues the sporadic increase in prices. But while in Lebanon, the impact can lead to a transformation on agricultural production on the longer term because of this very heterogeneous system. If you want to simplify it, let's say Lebanon system can be divided into three type of production. The first one is mostly fruit production that is export dependent, and as the export dependent fruit production is highly dependent on political shock, security shock. If border close, we cannot export our fruits. The second type of system is a vegetable system that we talked about, an open field system that is also highly dependent on the idea of producing a large yield and producing a lot to be able to ensure a certain level of income. And both systems do oversupply markets, and is a do oversupply local market. We have a lot of apples, we have a lot of bananas, we have a lot of citrus, and those products are export dependent. If we do not export them, we prices farm prices collapse, and then we have farmers face significant issues. Also, vegetables are oversupplied, and it's something that people might not know. Usually, the common understanding is that we do not produce enough vegetable, but also vegetables market are oversupplied, and because of this willingness to produce a lot of uh, this needs to have a large output to cover the high price of the small margin that farmers have. So they need to produce intensively and produce a lot, and we end up with vegetables that are oversupplied. And then you have a system where we do not produce wheat and we do not produce meat. We do not produce cereal and meat. And those are commodities that are highly dependent on international prices. So we may face issues with these imports when prices increase. So the system as a whole, oversupply in intensive production, dependent on export market, dependent on local input, and also dependent on exported commodity. Why you do not feel it? Why? I mean, why do farm people in Beirut do not feel it? Because the transformation, the impact, do not always translate into middle classes, urban household for several reasons. The first one is because the system is oligopolistic, and the oversupply of products of fruits or vegetables do not translate to lower prices because the system is controlled by traders and supermarket and retailers that stabilize prices to level for Beirut. So use have high margin and pay very little to the farmers. The oversupply is often translated into unsold products. When you go to a farmer, you will hear him, "I did not sell my lettuce. I just gave it to grazing for sheep or ruminant because it was too low of a price." So this oversupply is not felt in low prices, and do not, and people do not see it, but it's felt as a undergo a slow agricultural transformation that is pushing people out and changing the way food is produced locally on the medium term without necessarily having people feel it. The same for wheat prices, wheat and meat prices, because usually the shock are sporadic. It's a speculative market. The prices do not stay high for a longer term. So people might feel a certain shock at a certain period of time, but then prices stabilize to another to a more normal level. Plus, surprisingly, the Lebanese government had implemented a policy that are able to minimize shocks related to wheat. We have a policy that stabilized prices of bread, and we have a policy that during period of shocks the government import wheat directly. So within this window of crisis of 4 5 months, like it happened in 2008, like it happened also during the Ukraine war, and it might hopefully also happen now, if the government steps in and stabilize prices of wheat and also have some policy, people in Beirut do not feel what the farmers are feeling. And this is also this idea of what the Marxist fetishism, that we don't know how food is produced. We just see it on our table. So people in Beirut, we might talk about shock in agriculture, we might talk about farmers feeling issues, but they always end up having food on the table with more or less prices that they can pay for, especially middle classes. But there is a slow, latent transformation that might not necessarily always go into the right direction when we talk about farmers and smallholders.
Okay, I just wanted to follow up quickly on that. So, okay, the maybe middle class urban populations might not feel it, but at the same time, we keep hearing that food security in Lebanon is in crisis. That the worst is coming. There was a new IPC report, I think, like a week ago, that kind of was ringing the alarm bell. So, who are the populations that might feel this? Just to clarify.
Exactly. Well, the three categories, I would say: urban poor, in mostly in cities. In Tripoli is a very poor city, high level of urban poverty. In Saida as well, high level of urban poverty. Those issue of, again, of affordability. The problem with this with the approach to how to answer the IPC report and how to take action is always the idea, okay, we do not produce enough food. But that's not necessarily the issue. The food is there. Oversupply is actually sometimes also wasted or not sold. The issue is really an issue of poverty and vulnerability. So yes, urban poor are the first one that are impacted by this increase of prices in food, and that might be the one that have most impacted in terms of food security. Then, of course, rural areas that farmers that are out of farming, that also gradually being out of farming and losing their income, and in a situation of shock as this one, in situation of war, displaced people who have lost income. So the issue of food insecurity that is not necessarily related to the fact that we do not is not related to the fact that we do not produce, but rather to the fact that people are not able to generate enough income to be able to buy. Plus, to the fact that high margin from traders always keep prices relatively high, uh, and this oversupply is not translated into lower prices. So the vulnerable population is highly impacted um, by the crisis, but from really an economic perspective, not because food is not there.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. The distinction between accessibility and affordability. Um, so I wanted to switch a bit to talk about food sovereignty. So, food sovereignty is a concept that we've decided to use at the Arab Reform Initiative with our work on food, and you yourself use that concept in your own work. And of course, sovereignty, siyada as a whole, is now a popular or infamous and fought over, contested concept, not just in Lebanon specifically, but also in the region as a whole. So, how does the concept of food sovereignty help us make sense of this kind of broad political economic moment?
Yeah, I think there is two aspects to it. The first one is food sovereignty, and what we have been trying to do in network of food sovereignty activists and rural right to food activists is to break the myth of Lebanon do not produce its food. And this is also what I try to a little bit talk about when we describe the system. We have a system that oversupplies. The number that says 80% of food is imported, we don't really know where it comes from. It was never. It's not a data that is discussed. That we don't know where these numbers came from. It must be appear in some of the ministry of the FAO report at some point, and people keep using it. And I think it's mostly related to the term of trade. And this term of trade translate in terms of trade values. This food also include the raw salmon that we import, the high quality cheese that we import, the high quality cheese. I mean, the imported cheese. That so even the wine that we might also be importing. And so when we talk about this 80% is really an issue of trade, of balance of trade that also include agro industries and imported high level of expensive luxury goods also to a certain extent. Okay, not all of this import are like that, but a large part of it is like that. So ultimately, agricultural production, what you have on your table is produced by Lebanese farmers. The fruit, the vegetables that we eat is produced by Lebanese farmers. The chicken that we have and the dairy that we have, eggs that are produced by Lebanese farmers. The only thing that are not necessarily produced by Lebanese farmers are the cereal and the meat. But we can do better. Yani we can do better and ensure that being more resilient to potential external shock by deciding of what you produce, by being less dependent on export production that is oversupplying a certain type of products and highly dependent, and the margin are made also by traders. So the idea of food sovereignty is to be able to, as much as possible, to produce your own food, and also to break this idea that agriculture is not producing food, and to remind people and citizens that live in urban area that what they have on the table is most probably produced by small Lebanese farmers, and if they want this to stay, they need to support small farming and small scale farming and production. The second idea is also, especially when we are talking about ecocide and ethnic cleansing, is lots. We've talked a bit about people living in Beirut and urban areas, but Lebanese identity is really rural. We defined ourselves through our rurality, and through our attachment to our forests, our attachment to our villages, our attachment to our land, and ultimately the attachment to the land is translated into attachment to what the land produce and what the rurality produce, and it produce not only food, it also produce culture, it also produce landscape, it also produces this type of attachment in Lebanon, and mostly in all other countries. It's not a specificity, and the term, even the term sovereignty, has a larger sense when we talk about South Lebanon. Like in other places in the country, people in South Lebanon, people in border villages, are attached to their land, are attached to their resources. It was always part of the way they fought occupation in the past, and how they are prepared to fight occupation in the future, and the return the food, the fact that agriculture and food sovereignty is a total, is a full part of how national sovereignty over South Lebanon, national sovereignty over bordering villages should be translated into. Is we will go back to those villages because we will produce food there, we will produce landscape, we will use their resources, we will use their forests. So it has a double meaning in terms of produce what we eat, but also express our attachment to our country and to our villages, and fight expansionism and ecocide and ethnic cleansing by this idea of return. And I think that this, we don't know how things will evolve, but I think the support of small scale farming and small systems should not wait, should start with wherever we can get into. So if we are able to go to coastal Sur and coastal area, we start from there. If we are able to go to Nabati, we start from there. We do not have to wait to support farmers until the area is liberated and the occupation withdraw. We can start wherever at any place we can reach.
Yeah, so how exactly do we do that now? I mean, farmers, when I interviewed farmers for this piece I'm working on, they said, just let us return and we will deal with it. Like, "دبر حالنا." Like we can figure it out, just let us return. But as you said, I mean, the situation in the meantime, what can be done? What is the government doing, if anything, to ameliorate the catastrophe facing farmers? Are there indemnities or compensations? So let's talk about maybe the government policy. Also, let's talk about international aid. You yourself have written a lot about the international intervention in Lebanon's agricultural systems. Like, what are we looking at right now? And then on the third kind of side of the assistance, support, solidarity, what type of support can grassroots or civil society organizations give right now?
Yeah, let's start with what the government is doing, and unfortunately, I mean, the government currently, if you just want to talk about agricultural issue, has not provided specific scheme to support farmers in South Lebanon. What is being done is standard MOSA support to displaced population, and so on. To date, there is no direct to my knowledge, no direct support to farmers. And actually, it is not to date. Even in the last war in 2004 and 2005, the government has not developed specific intervention in support to farmers to South Lebanon, nor donors have. There was a clear lack of funds for to support local to support return to South Lebanon. There was no fund for South Lebanon even during the last period, and this could be understood or like rational in the idea of that those funds are politically connected. So there is a need for concessions, or we don't know why yet the funds to support farmers in South Lebanon have been very limited. That's from the aspect of the from the government and donor aspect. Donor in terms of what they have done in period of crisis, like if you talk about the 2019 shocks and the post Ukraine shock, is support input vouchers to farmers, is to support wheat production as a way to support food security, and a very uh, limited support to agroecology or to cooperative. And the idea is that historically the shift in donor support happened after the 2019 crisis, and it's a very very small shift. Previously, donors have focused on export-oriented production, on competitive value chains, on certain elements that focused on competitiveness and export-oriented production. After 2019, the shift started to happen, but remained very limited in and to input voucher or other. I think what is needed from donor is really a paradigm shift, to acknowledge that reforms are needed, that local markets reform are key, and political reform are key for the development of the sector, and that support to small farmers and to farmers organizations, support not only technical but also socio-political support to their capacity to organize, to represent themselves, and to empower farmers in a very unfair food system might be an entry point for a better development of and more impactful policy. Uh, the the character, yani, today donor policy have not been really farmer centered, but rather like value chain perspective, and in that perspective they might ended up willingly or unwillingly supporting more powerful actors like traders or aggregators or also, and they have been shy and unwilling to challenge public policy and to challenge the government in terms of deep reforms for a fairer market, deep reform of the wholesale market, deep reform of the cooperative structure, and other aspects that are highly needed in terms of of improving the fairness of ecosystem of food systems.
Yeah, I want to take the chance and plug the paper that you have coming out soon with us, where Kanj looks at the history of donor intervention, and the paper should be out very, very soon. Um, okay, maybe these conversations, I could talk to you for, all day, but these conversations are supposed to be like half hours. So maybe let's just end on, what can or what are grassroots civil society, you yourself are part of a coalition, the agroecology coalition of Lebanon. What are they doing right now, and anything you want to close with,
Yeah.
anything we haven't discussed that you think is important?
I think right now the focus is really on emergency and support to displaced people, and that was the case during the period of the war. So really supporting the displaced population with in-kind support and food support. But gradually, this is moving to be able to support farmers that have initiated a return, and I think this is extremely important to start where we can get to. And this type of support requires really rebuilding in certain area, rebuilding from scratch the production systems of support to nurseries to be able to produce trees to replace trees, support to animal husbandry by being able to recreate between bracket livestock, like to breed livestock and distribute it, either poultry but also small remnants. So it's a rebuilding process that need to start in kind, and the agri movement and the agriculture and members of the agroecological coalition are also working into rebuilding gradually and supporting farmers into recovering livelihoods, really from the raw material in a way. So seedlings, trees, and livestock to be able to recreate this natural and physical assets capital, so farmer can restart. And in that aspect, I think we should be ready to take the risk that war will start again. But this is a risk that we should be willing to take, because we cannot wait really for it to end up livelihood and return. People are eager to return to wherever they can put that they can be there in safety, and this return should come with an improvement in agricultural production through rebuilding really the productive capacity of farmers in terms of, as I said, seedlings, nursery, trees, and livestock. And I think this is more than necessarily what input or like chemicals. No, there is no need currently for really chemicals, but local production of supporting local nursery, local breeders to be able to produce and then be able to redistribute that to returning farmers so they can reinitiate production in their land.
Okay, thank you so much, Kanj. Yeah, I just want to tell everyone to please look out for or read the Q&A that's already available, but also look out for Kanj's paper coming out on donors. And we have other papers coming out on food sovereignty. But aside from knowledge production, if you want to, support the initiatives that Kanj was talking about, there is the Agroecology Coalition of Lebanon, the Haraka Ziraiya agricultural movement in Lebanon, agri movement. There's also Jibal. There are organizations you can look to and support directly. Great, thank you so much, Kanj.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Ari, and
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening.